Right, so I just like came up with car check. I was like, I want to know that I'm right. You know, right? I know. And like, do you know, like this is the report I was given. He's doing county report. And I don't know like 1 minute. Everything. So, like,
It takes a little longer. Who cares? Fine. In line, yeah, some of the things you do, any recommendation, I'll help you one, so that we work together on a project. So I'll try and translate it, I'll see how it with you. But
I didn't know John was here anytime to get out. It's a game changer. It's not
just did 1, 2.
That's also why
Just did 1, 2. Just did 1, 2. Dust, dust. Trust us.
and I want like a free one.
That's good. That's
No, she's gonna know that.
recently.
Everyone's like,
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is
like,
do it
you
now.
know, so drinks.
I'm gonna send it to everyone, so they're like,
I've been at the back,
probably just gonna email her mine now.
This is really. This is supposed to be fun. This is TV.
I always made the Mediterranean salad.
You miserably.
Really good.
You go to.
I got the option. I think that's what I'm
Make a lot of money. There's not to be true.
Okay, yeah, that's smart.
I'm sorry. I'm emailing.
So I'm gonna leave in a full size salad, not a half size.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got some half size last time I was right.
Nothing.
I was like, how? Wait, so she doesn't have size?
Tell her full size.
Oh, okay.
For sure, yeah.
So I should just split it.
So you can split it, yeah.
I'm never surprised. Erica's all about fries.
She's ready for this one.
I told her ordering that from them. She was like, oh, fries. Okay, yeah. Like, just convenient. Well, actually, maybe not.
I always ask for extra grilled flatbread with a Mediterranean salad, and they never give it to me, but I ask every time.
Should we say that?
Yeah, it's really good. I don't know if you want the carbs, but it's really good.
I think that, is it Dan who's like a secret order with them?
Oh, yeah.
No, I asked you flat out. I
Yeah.
actually
So annoying.
said, how much time do I have?
Extra grilled flatbread.
Because they're gonna need some.
So last time we all went to a comedy show. And then afterwards we got our turkey pizza. And we were like, it was so good.
I'm sure, yeah.
I think I'm gonna go now.
I feel like we really accomplished it. Like when we had the pizza.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right, that was
Oh, yeah, I wanna see.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody in person. I'm Jasper Snyder with the ARF. Thanks for coming. Good morning, everybody online, the thousands and millions online. Evelyn's going to be your representative today, so any questions you have, put it through the system, and Evelyn will bring them up later on. So I hesitate to repeat this. I've said it a bunch of times. We all know cross-platform advertising is super impactful. The average 5-platform campaign is 35% more effective than a single platform campaign on average. So it's one thing to know that using multiple platforms is super effective. It's another thing entirely to determine which media vehicle within those platforms are particularly effective, right? And there are a whole bunch of methodologies you can use for figuring that out. Where it gets really thorny is particularly when you're looking at online media exposure and offline purchases, right? And indeed the other way around. So one of the companies that's really taken a lead in that particular space is DataLogix, now part of the Oracle Data Cloud. We're honored to have Professor Trent Salazar here, who's a senior data scientist over at ODC. He's been there since 2013, I think. Done some really interesting work on effective frequency. I'd love to chat about that at some point with you. So I'm going to hand over to you. Tell us a little bit about what you do and some fantastic thought leadership you bring. Thank you, everybody. Welcome, Trent.
Thank you. So, thanks for having me. First of all, I'm really excited to be here. I've watched, followed along with the other videos online, and so I was joking with a couple of people in my group that if you had to look at the list of speakers and figure out which one doesn't belong, I think I'd probably jump up first. I'm not a chief product officer or chief research officer, but I do know the data, and that's kind of what I want to spend our time talking about today is, well, with digital advertising and what we see in the data and some kind of meaningful stories that have popped out there. So I think first of all, though, so looking at the other companies that are speaking as part of this series, looking at Nielsen, Comscore make perfect sense why they're here. I think Oracle would be another one that pops out as maybe not belonging as well. So a little background on Oracle Data Cloud, just to give you some context. So Oracle Data Cloud is really just an amalgamation of several acquisitions that Oracle has done in the digital advertising space. So BlueKai was originally, again, an independent company. It's one of the first companies that we really acquired and has served as the foundation of the Oracle Data Cloud. And BlueKai brought along our audience marketplace, which is a marketplace where third parties as well as curated data can be sold to various publishers. It's integrated with Facebook and Twitter, provides tens of thousands of different audiences, and allows companies an effective way to monetize their data. Datalogics, which is my parent company and where I started, was focused more on linking offline transaction data to online activity data. And so that's from Datalogics, we've gotten the core of our identity graph, which is how we link offline data to the online activity data. Purchase-based targeting, so the ability to target based off of buyers of your brand or buyers in your category, buyers of your competitors, etc. And then causal measurement, which is kind of what, to the extent that we're known in the industry, what we're best known for integrations with Facebook and Google and Twitter. We'll talk a little bit more about that measurement and the insights from it. Recent acquisitions have been AddThis, so that little square with the plus that you might have seen in a lot of websites. Gives us a nice repository of online behavioral data to track across platforms. And Crosswise is actually only a couple months old and gave us the ability to link mobile IDs to those offline household transaction data that we got through our Datalogics acquisition. So a little bit more about me and why I am here, given that I'm not a chief product officer, chief research officer, and relatively new to the space. So I lead our strategic analytics group within Oracle Data Cloud, and my group is specifically responsible for industry-facing research, thought leadership, and really kind of our core asset, though, is our norms database, which is our repository of all of our measurement studies that we've done across, I think we have 70 different media partners or so, and then our key verticals that we've measured across are consumer packaged goods, so things like P&G, Unilever, Coke, Pepsi's of the world, automotive, retail, and we're just expanding now to our new Visa partnership into fast food restaurants, Starbucks, Home Depot, so kind of big bold bracket retailers. And so these are some of the key media partners that we have in our norms database, as well as kind of what you can think of as the longer tail of the ad tech ecosystem, so the different DSPs and exchanges. And so the norms database is probably about 5 years worth of data that we've really been active in the space, but the vast majority of it's come in the past year or so it's fresh and it's representative. It's definitely skewed towards the largest brands in the respective verticals, and so in that sense, it gives us a really nice asset that we can use for learnings because of the fact that these are brands that spend millions and millions of dollars on advertising each year on the largest platforms, and so while every company doesn't have the ability to spend like that, it does give us the ability to draw insights from those who do have the larger research budgets. Sorry, real fast, just before I get going, sorry if this has been done in all the other sessions, just in the room, can I get a quick show of hands of just to get a sense of where in the industry everyone's falling? Is there anyone here from a brand or advertiser? Perfect, okay, good. I mean, different message probably. What about agencies? And then what about more ad tech measured things along insight? So Nielsen, NCS, Comscore. What am I missing?
Media company.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, media company. Okay, awesome. So more on the media side of things. Definitely good to know, and that'll be particularly relevant once we get into some of the frequency and execution recommendations that we've been able to derive from norms. So I'll go through our, as every ad tech presentation, you have to have an obligatory e-marketer chart. So through this one in here on TV digital ads, on TV's ad spend versus digital ad spend, and you can obviously see digital's closing the gap. And again, there are probably people who are way more qualified to speak about why this is happening than I am, and so I'm not really going to focus on this today. But I think some of the key things that we've seen is a fundamental shift in marketing from groups, larger groups, getting smaller, and that's been happening over time. And the real exponential changes happen with digital innovation and the ability to switch advertising, again, from a group focus to the individual. More control and more levers for advertisers to pull than they've ever had to pull in the past. Traditionally, it's been around messaging and creative, potentially different types of ad buys. But digital offers more than the traditional channels, like I said, one point in time, probably even fathom. And the opportunity to serve ads in an efficient manner with relatively low transaction costs. There are fewer middlemen in the process now, still not completely seamless, but it's allowed the cost of reaching households and getting your message across to drop dramatically for digital, with obvious variance, but all else being equal, it tends to be a very cost-efficient medium. And so, another marketing cliche, the John Wanamaker quote about half the money I spend on advertising is wasted, the trouble is I don't know which half. So my view on why digital has been gaining so quickly on TV is that digital produces way more data than TV does, or probably can ever hope to do. And that lets us do a lot of things, and it lets marketers do a lot of things, and those of us within the industry do a lot of things with the data that they do produce. And so I think that one of the reasons why we've seen such large growth in the digital space is because we now have the data to answer this type of question and to let advertisers know how is their media performing and how to optimize accordingly. And so, before, when media was thought of at a zip, maybe a DMA level, and maybe a demo within that, we now think in terms, again, of individuals or households. And just for the single household, we have the data from the impressions, from the exposure data of the ad campaigns. We have the transaction data that comes in as well for the same household. We have behavioral data outside of the campaign, where they go, where they online, what products they're researching, what magazines what online magazines they read. And then we have lots of identity information that lets us link kind of these three major buckets of data together. So online, you can think of cookies or registration IDs, and then offline is everything from your address to mobile ad IDs and different types of device links that can be done. So in spite of all this data, and this is kind of getting to what I really want to talk about today, is that we still see a lot of room for growth across the digital ecosystem, and certainly in our norms database. So if anyone had to guess, so does anyone here know what return on ad spend, ROAS, how does ROAS calculated?
Reach times incremental spend per household divided by total campaign spend.
Yeah, perfect. So incremental sales divided by the cost of the campaign. Basically, a return on the dollars that you spent to run the campaign. That. So it's a common industry-wide metric of success, because it says for your campaign, what type of return did you get from that money? And so across again, our norms database, and this is primarily focused in the consumer goods space, is that nearly half of campaigns don't even pay for themselves, much less produce a sufficient return to cover the margins of the product itself. Particularly in consumer goods, where someone like Coke will only see a small percentage of the dollar that's actually spent on the end product. Is that this is just not enough to cut it with the advertisers. And then even within this, we see even worse numbers with programmatic campaigns. So think of kind of open web, longer tail, where we see only a quarter of them actually pay for themselves, at least in the short run. And I think this never ceases to surprise advertisers when we show them these types of numbers or measurement reports for their individual campaigns. And publishers, when we do new integrations, I think common feedback that we get is these are the lowest numbers I've ever seen before, which is understandable and all. But I think it's really important to understand that while digital does give us a tremendous amount of opportunity for optimization, for improvement, for better audiences, better creative, better execution, is that we're still in the very early stages of figuring out how to use this medium and how to use it effectively, as evidenced by these numbers. And so I think that if you were to ask the average advertiser what they would expect a typical return on for a campaign to be, is that I think that those numbers would probably be staggering to them, and with good reason. I mean, kind of what we talk about internally within Oracle is the marketer's delusion of kind of what return on ad spend should be. So here's an example from the NCS 2016 ARF presentation for their benchmark of a sales return on advertising ranging from 3 to 5x. Here's a ComScore white paper for Kellogg's boosting their digital by 6x. And just so I'm not picking on everyone else without us, is that, I mean, we're certainly subject to this as well. You can see a case study that our marketing team has published with showing that for a particular category audience, showing a 4x return on ad spend. And I mean, these types of things are, I mean, these are a small sample, but they're very representative of the types of marketing collateral, white papers, industry-facing research, everything about how you can increase your return on ad spend, your ROI by several x. And I think what this is largely driven by is the fact that in the ad tech ecosystem, there's very little incentive to show bad results for a campaign. For the media providers, I mean, their kind of bar for measurement is it believable to advertisers? And then if it is, then I want it as high as possible. Totally makes sense because they want more media spend. For the media partner, since the publisher or the media provider is usually the one paying for the measurement, they're certainly incentivized to show higher results despite being a third party and supposed to be agnostic at least. And the advertisers themselves, who you would think have the biggest stake in terms of seeing real results, have kind of anchored themselves around these 3, 4, 5x ROI numbers, and that's kind of at least what they pay lip service to of what they believe and what they expect with a typical campaign. But I think if you look at their actions, you see something that tells a really different story. And so one of my favorite econ professors in college, when talking about like people and their behavior, had the somewhat memorable phrase of, money talks, bullshit walks. And I think that's very true in the advertising world as well, where despite, even if advertisers are saying that they expect a 3, 4, 5x return on ad spend, is that if you look at their actions, they certainly don't match up with that. And so, if a company actually believed that they were getting a 3x return on their advertising, I mean, they would act dramatically different than what they do. I mean, kind of some tongue-in-cheek examples are, immediately whole R&D. If anyone's ever done any capital budgeting or research, companies oftentimes have a hurdle rate for the type of ROI they expect to see on a particular project before they decide to invest in it. I can guarantee you that number is not 300%. I mean, at that type of return, you can literally borrow money, even at 10% interest rate, which is pretty high. If you're getting a 100% return, that's a pretty healthy chunk of change, and should literally just be borrowing money so you can shovel more into advertising. I mean, obviously, never advise a company to do this. No company actually does this. But if you believe the return on ad spend story and ROI story that we commonly tell in the industry, is that this is what you would expect to see if they actually did believe it. And so the real problem, besides just not aligning with the data, with this kind of delusion that we talked ourselves into, is that there are real pockets of success within digital. Is that we do see some campaigns that show those types of return on ad spend. Granted, it's not the majority. It's not even a quarter of them. But there are pockets of success, and there's relatively low-hanging fruit that a honest eye towards the data and enough of it would reveal if there were the right incentives to do it. And so that's kind of what my focus is on today is to talk about some of those things that are opportunities for improvement that are relatively low cost, don't require dramatically overhauling all the infrastructure, but are things that for one reason or another tend to be missed by a lot of advertisers or agencies acting on their behalf or media providers. So before jumping into some more of the content, any questions on what I talked about so far? I mean, any perspective on what types of returns you expect to see on your campaigns, what you see from advertisers who are running on your platform? Okay, cool. We'll jump into the data then. So looking at campaign performance, this is kind of what we've started to use internally on my team when we talk to advertisers about their campaign performance. With a norms database, particularly when you're showing a norms database where the median return on ad spend is hovering right around 1 or a little less than. We get a lot of advertisers who run, a large number of measurement studies wanting us to come in and talk through what we're seeing, how they compare to their competitive set. And after a lot of those conversations, we've kind of formalized it as this pentagon of these different dimensions that we look at and compare advertisers on. And so going clockwise, the first step is picking the right success metrics and aligning those metrics with real business objectives. The second one is the audience. You need to find the right people to influence and who your ads can actually have a meaningful chance of converting to whatever that business outcome is. Campaign execution. So on the media side, this is everything from reach frequency planning, bid optimization, everything that's kind of a lever to media providers or those who are executing campaigns on their behalf. And then obviously creative, what the messaging is, how those ads are laid out, and the features associated with it. And then finally our kind of brand specific attributes. The optimal media mix and the optimal execution varies wildly based off of whether the brand is a tiny brand that's local and regional versus a large brand. And so that dimension is focusing more on some of those effects and how advertising changes from for larger, higher penetration brands and lower penetration brands. And so the three kind of dimensions that I want to focus on today, because I think we have time to go through all 5 of them, are picking the right success metrics, on some insights that we found around audience, and then campaign execution. So with digital, there's been a proliferation in different types of campaign objectives that we see. It's everything from clicks, which is kind of the old school, and there's been sufficient research and data, most of it very good, around why clicks is probably a bad metric to optimize towards. But we still see the same general concept of, whether it be views on ads, and within views you have viewed for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and all the way through to the end. Click-through rates, redemption rates, various types of engagement metrics for ads, number of viewable impressions, which certainly makes sense. At least from our perspective and what we advise our clients on, is that everything you measure in advertising should relate back to sales. And if you can't measure sales directly, you should at least have a very, very strong reason to believe and data to back it up that whatever metric you are measuring and optimizing towards relates back to sales, at least at some point at the end of the day. Like you can even think of the longest term branding objectives of, we don't even want to talk about our products. We don't even want to make specific things about it. We just want to let people know who we are. Coke is one of the famous examples of this. Everyone knows who Coke is, and yet they still spend millions and millions of dollars a year on advertising. At some point in time, all of that should be tied back to sales, to some increase in sales, just probably over a longer term horizon than what you'd expect to see in a direct response campaign. And so, at least in the immediate term, gross sales tends to be the metric of choice. And this is simply for the people who saw an ad, what types of revenue, or how much revenue do you see from them? And so, in the consumer goods space, this tends to be a fairly large number. It can certainly be smaller for online retailers. And then over the intermediate term, and this is kind of where we more focus, and the clients that we work with the norms database focus, is more on incremental sales. And this tends to be over a 1 to 3 month horizon. So for example, if you run a 3-month campaign, looking at the 4 to 12 weeks after the campaign runs and seeing what the impact was. And so that return on ad spend number that I showed at the beginning of the presentation is based on this 1 to 3 month horizon. So, it's an important caveat that, well, half of the campaigns didn't pay for themselves, or 3/4 of the programmatic ones. That's only in the short term. Over the long term, they may have attracted new buyers that had a lifetime value that led the campaigns to pay for themselves in the long run. But at least in the immediate term, that they were unsuccessful by most advertisers' threshold for what constitutes a successful campaign. And then, as I mentioned, like a longer term one is a lifetime value metric, and that's really looking at 3 to 24 months. You can certainly look out beyond that with any data, any prediction or forecasting or any sort of longer cycle measurement is hard. And the further you go out, the harder it gets. And so we typically advise to stick within the next 24 months, which seems like a reasonable time frame that you'd expect something, again, more open-ended, like a branding campaign to pay off, if it's going to pay off at all. And so kind of digging into these metrics, you can see that gross sales has the benefit of being able to run it immediate or in flight. It's a simple aggregation. And in fact, it really has nothing to do with the media. It's all about who you're actually exposing the media to. Now, obviously, it's hard, if not impossible, to expose all the people in the audience. So that's why where the media partner component comes in, of figuring out who was actually reaching the campaign. But it's simply a good kind of instant read of, are you reaching buyers of your brand, or buyers in your category, or competitive buyers, or whoever that objective is. And then the two on the right for incremental sales and lifetime value are more what we refer to as causal, which is specifically causal here being that they measure the impact of the media on the audience. So they take into account whatever the exposed population would have spent on the brand anyways. So this is oftentimes done. Well, actually, we'll talk about some of the ways that the causal measurement is performed on the next slide with a little deeper dive on these. And so the gross sales, like I mentioned, is a simple aggregation, accounting exercise really, but it can be very popular and again beneficial from an optimization standpoint. A lot of the research that we have about what the best predictors of sales lift, or again that incremental impact of media, is whether or not someone's bought in the brand in the past 52 weeks. And so to the extent that that's something that the brand is bought into and the advertiser believes is a good predictor of performance for a campaign, gross sales can be an effective metric to allocate budget within a campaign then to those different channels wherever you're actually able to find those buyers. The pros, again, it's light analytical overhead, and can be calculated in flight or at any kind of time period. The cons being is that it doesn't gauge the effectiveness of the media, and it's not beyond just kind of in-flight optimizations. It's not a great way to determine how you're gonna actually how you should be allocating your budget across different channels, different media partners, different tactics, creative, etc. The next one on that we have here is the incremental sales, which is where again our focus generally is. It's the short term of the causal metrics, and it's really looking at, if you can think of the advertising campaign really is two different effects. One is an audience effect, which is the effect of the people you're actually reaching, and the other is the media effect, which is actually the incremental impact of that media on those people. And so the two causal kind of focuses here are ones that take those into account. And the two main ways of doing this are either one, a holdout, which is kind of your traditional method of causal measurement, which is you try to find a population that is exactly like the audience that you want to reach. You show them a public service ad or some sort of placebo effect, basically, and then look at the amount that they spent during the measurement window, and then you compare that to the amount that the population that saw an ad spent, and usually attribute that to the media effect of the campaign. The problem with holdouts is that they're incredibly hard to execute. So I don't know if you guys have read any stories on this recently, but like Facebook has a tool out called the Lift tool, and they're the best we've been able to see to execute this so far for a true serve time holdout of finding a control audience that does at any given point in time. Because the tough thing with digital is that with the amount of optimization and that happens through the auction and through different levers that are being pulled, is that even if you find a control group that looks similar to your audience at the beginning of the campaign, in all likelihood, the campaign is optimized away from that, and you end up with two populations that look pretty dissimilar to each other. And so holdouts are kind of the traditional way of doing things. They still definitely have a role and are popular with some advertisers. What we do some holdout measurement, we tend to be more on the forensic control side of things, which is really creating a synthetic control. So part of the data logics acquisition that Oracle did is that it gave us access to tens of millions of households and their transaction data, and the ability to link that transaction data for each of those households to see an ad on Facebook or Twitter or Google or any other or most other media platforms online. And given how large that intersection is where we have transaction data, is that we have a high degree of confidence, and we have a model that's able to predict this confidence. that says that, if you serve a campaign that reaches this many people, we'll be able to find a control audience, i.e. an audience that it did not see the ad, that's sufficiently like the audience that did, that we can just go ahead and create the control on the back end. And so that's what we do with our ROI product. But that certainly has its downsides as well. It tends to be like fairly expensive to execute, so it tends to price itself out of a large number of media spend and is really kind of reserved for the upper tier of your P&Gs, Unilevers, Cokes of the world, who are spending hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on a campaign. And they require a large sample size because you need to have that confidence that you're actually going to be able to find people who look like your exposed audience. And if you don't do that beforehand, in order to be sure, you need to know that you're going to have a suitable audience, an audience that's suitably large enough to build a control that looks like it. And then lifetime value, again, in the consumer goods space, tends to be done by media mix modeling, which is kind of the gold standard, which has a lot of academic weight behind it and has been used for a long time to really get the total return on a media portfolio and the return from the different channels within a media portfolio. And so that kind of academic rigor behind it is its main strength. The downside of it is that it tends to be very expensive and take a long time to do. And so, and the insights are not terribly granular. So when it comes to digital optimization, MMM is great for broad signals, but as far as how to improve going forward or what tactics or audiences messages within a campaign, MMM tends to be a tough one to use in order to gain those insights. Yeah.
When talking about the holdout, what is your opinion on waiting? So, the campaign just falls out and then you weight the unexposed group based off of like pre-period purchasing, purchasing of the brand or category.
Yeah, and so it's definitely preferable to not waiting. That sounds like an obvious statement, but for a lot of advertisers it isn't. You tell them it's a one-to-one match, and that seems to be preferable. And it makes sense, because in an advertiser's head, if I were sitting from their perspective and I heard that a company was waiting, I would think of, there's some household out in Iowa that's representing the entire middle of the United States. And so I do get that. It's definitely preferable preferable to not waiting. I think even within waiting though, there's a huge spectrum of things that you can do statistically. And so most people, when they wait, they do it based off of the average of the two groups and get the averages to match up. And they do it across one dimension, maybe two dimensions. And again, better than nothing. So I don't want to give the impression that that's not good. It is. We found that in our early iteration of our measurement products did weighting, or basically weighted the means to look alike. We subsequently implemented a method called Entropy Balancing, which is a very, very fancy name for just saying that rather than just the mean, we make the distributions look alike, and seen a meaningful reduction in the standard error, and saw that just doing the means tend to weight things higher. And then the biggest thing though is making sure that they weight along a number of different dimensions. And so it's because it's not just pre-spend, right? It's whether or not they purchased in the brand before, and that is the best predictor of whether or not someone will purchase in the measurement window. So it's an important dimension to weight on. But there's also the demographics, geography, the actual availability of the product in the region, which is a huge thing that a lot of measurement forgets, and then also online activity, because you can think of someone who checks their Facebook 10 times a day is probably a different person altogether, or would make up a different audience than your person who checks it once a month. And so it's definitely preferable not waiting. And I mentioned that we do some holdout measurement, and we do that exact same thing on the back end. So it improves. I wish I had a firm number for you on kind of the shift we generally see once we wait versus doing the pure holdout, but I don't have one for you off the top of my head. Any other questions? So this is kind of speaking to why the causality thing is important. If on the previous slide, we said the downside for both incremental sales as well as media mix is that it's expensive and it takes a long time. And so gross sales are, a lot of different multi-touch attribution solutions that are available can be a very appealing option. Again, optimization, I think it's great. Judging the actual effectiveness of the media is a really different story and can lead to a lot of false conclusions. And so looking across our norms database, we're able to look at, for the sales that we observed for the exposed population during the average campaign, almost 98% of it would have happened regardless of whether or not the ad was shown to that population. And so you can think of that 98% if you were just attributing gross sales across different channels or different tactics or strategies, is that that's the vast majority of your spend that you're then allocating across those different, whereas really the real signal is in that 2% and would likely be obscured by wherever you're finding the 98% going. And again, the goal in optimization is not to put your money where you're seeing the most value today. It's where it has the most opportunity to do you the most good. And so, you can think of a billboard as a really simple example of, if you were able to optimize your billboard, which would be changing its placement basically, and what you were optimizing towards was how many people who saw the billboard and then how many people went into the store and bought, is that what you'd eventually end up doing is just putting the billboard right next to the entrance of the store, because everyone who's going to walk in the store anyways see the billboard and you count it. Obviously, I certainly haven't heard anyone propose to do that in real life, but doing allocation and judging effectiveness on gross sales is effectively like doing that, because what you end up with are media partners or agencies changing their allocation to go and serve people who are going to buy anyways. Yeah.
Is this metric here, is this really referred to more established companies? I would think it does, as
it does.
We're looking at growth strategy companies or new companies on the market. Do you break out data for that?
So I guess it's, what would you consider to be, give me a ballpark kind of line in the sand of what you consider to be kind of a large company versus one that's smaller, more growth centric.
Well, you mentioned,
for examples.
You mentioned, obviously Disney or Coca-Cola, any of the large cap companies.
Sure.
Smaller companies, those can vary very much from
Absolutely.
From a 10-person startup to a company that's just starting to get their stride at 200, but gross sales are 50 million.
Sure.
That's a definite growth strategy business, and it all depends on the size of the market too that they're in.
Definitely. So this number is in consumer goods specifically, and so even small brands that we measure in consumer goods are still multi-billion-dollar, at least parent companies. Maybe not. The brands might not have $1 billion billions of dollars in gross revenue, but their parent companies certainly do, and so it's absolutely skewed towards higher brands.
Okay.
I will say though that while I would expect this number to be lower for ones that are in more of a growth scenario or who are not as established, I still don't think it would make sense to optimize towards that number for them. In other words, because I would think of those companies in those situations are more about attracting net new buyers, I'd imagine. And in that case, if you're reaching people who are going to purchase anyways, who are going to try anyways, the incremental impact of your ad is still questionable in that respect. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. So for smaller growth-focused companies that don't have an established base of consumers, you're saying it's not worth them looking to optimize on a mixed basis. You're saying so what do they do?
No. So if they can afford, sorry, to back up. I think absent anything else, optimize on more of a gross basis. So just a non-incremental
gross basis
is definitely preferable to alternatives being kind of a click or engagement or online activity base.
Okay.
It's absolutely preferable. It's kind of again, each one of these three have their place, and it's not to say that any of them are actually better than the others. They all have meaningful downsides, and using them effectively is kind of the key here, or when to use them. I think that again, the con of it taking a long time and being expensive is a very real one, and not one to be dismissed. And absent anything else, just trying to figure out where your buyers are coming from is better than an alternative of finding where your maybe engagers are coming from or watchers are coming from. It's more of for brands that do have the ability to do some sort of causal-based measurement, that would be preferable when it comes to judging overall efficacy, general media allocation, etc. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question from a sales perspective, because
Sure.
I work at Nielsen, I work on MBI, so I work on this kind of stuff like a lot with them. And like if we had a database of norms and we went to our clients and said, you're mostly not moving anything, like based off of what we're seeing here, you know, like your campaigns aren't actually driving spend based off of our data,
Yeah.
they'd say, well, then I'm not buying anything from you, you know?
Yeah. I think the key here of, since it is in fact skewed towards higher brand, is that 2% of total spend is still a huge amount for a campaign to drive in a 4 to 12 week period.
Yeah.
So I think like the base size is really important here to remember. So promise myself I wouldn't do this because I end up getting myself in trouble when I do. But off the top of my head, I think like our typical campaign in norms is probably sees about 1.5 million incremental sales. So there's a ton of variation around that. But again, over a 4-week or 12-week time period, again, I think a lot of even very large brands would be content if that's what they were seeing. Again, depending on how much they're spending on that media. So definitely get it. I think the point is that, you know, with any particular digital campaign, you're looking to have an impact on a relatively small percentage of your overall customer base, and that tends to just change, you know, be a paradigm changer. But there's given the size of the base, is that there tends to be enough upside to make it worth it. But I totally get, and it's one of the benefits of being a data scientist. Of I don't have a sales number and don't have to sell towards these things. I can say throw these numbers out and have my salespeople yell at me later.
Hey, Trent,
which I totally get.
Before we move on, Dave, I think wants to make a quick tech fix. Can you just take a pause for a couple of minutes or something?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hey, you Greg.
No, I haven't watched it yet. I got some notes from some. Yeah, I'll watch. I'm trying to catch up because I don't get my time. Yeah, I'm just getting out.
Sarah's my trailer. Maybe totally different because I used to be on TV, but now I'm a Mac. Okay. So I'm doing it.
Yes, really, and Alice sent it to me yesterday.
Yeah, let me just. Just Jasper. Yeah, I deserve
Right. For the biographics. Yeah, I literally just last week delivered. I just last week got delivered a sample. And I don't typically include an ROAS. I think I just gone through that calculation. Yeah, I watched it. I didn't see Emily except for the digital
You said it's true.
Yeah, so I wonder who you work with now. Joe, you used to work with Joe. Yeah, he's a videologist.
He was leaving.
But you had to leave them before that. Yeah, she did AFC now.
Okay.
I
Primarily worked with Joe and then Joe.
You have a video.
Dylan. Does she still have Dylan?
I guess. I mean, that TV had moved over to
Okay.
So when I switched to Steve, he still does that.
I
think they still live Dylan.
I would have had a lot.
She actually moved to Nashville.
Okay.
She's like keeping the same
Chamber
job. Yeah.
Must be nice.
Yeah.
That's what I always say.
Don't waste your name.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm like, what? I'm Carrie.
Baylor is. Oh, Baylor's
Yeah.
He was reading my notes. I was there. I went.
He got married, he left, like all this stuff happened. The show's wife is Emily's boss. So, yeah, so she used to be her manager. And they restructured the organization. It used to be that all the math, like reports out from one person. And then they added, then there were just so many of them because of like, that they created like another level thing. So there's like five TV maps that report digital. And like I report to someone who's the head of digital maps. And like he's a PO of the show. And then the analytics. There you go. Yeah.
I was like, we just
So like for your yeah, well like technically. Allison is like the client service rep, so she's like one of your, and what's her name? Susan, they're like the client service team, so like the one point of contact. Emily gets pulled in for anything that's like not syndicated, so anything that's not the rate basically, so that's like she should be involved in anything like FBI or. Alyssa is Emily's, we call it AMAS, associate.
All right, thanks for your patience, everyone. Cheers, friends.
This is great. Good, oh good. I know,
So,
it's amazing.
Don't want to go backwards. Any other questions before moving on to the audience section? I mean, again, anything, happy to talk about. Just stop me. Otherwise, I could probably go on and talk through the data for much longer than you'd be willing to sit through. So before moving on, anything else? Cool. So from an audience perspective, just to set baseline expectations in the auto vertical, what percentage in a typical digital campaign, this is across probably a few hundred, again skewed towards large auto manufacturers, but at least representative of their spend, what percentage of the reach audience are actually in market for a car? Would you guess? 5%? Little low, little high. So it's 3%. And so to put this into context, so in the millions of dollars that a typical auto advertiser will spend on a digital campaign, only 3% of the households who they reach are actually going to buy a car, any car, not just their car, in the next 3 months. And this number only doubles to 6% when you look over the next 6 months. So even if your goal is branding, and it's just a general brand awareness one, I think most, I don't know if the autos would put their say that most of their ad dollars are spent that way, but at least it's kind of what it looks like to us. Picking audiences where you only have 3% of them who are going to purchase any car in the next 3 months, I've yet to see a great justification for this low of a percentage, but I'm certainly open to it because, yeah.
Well, to make that more dramatic, because we just looked this up for debate yesterday, not only on digital, auto, if you look at all advertising in the U.S. by industry, automotive is number one. That's the largest spending.
Is it?
Over pharma, over retail, over quick serve restaurants.
Is that newer? Have they raised? Have they climbed, or I don't know what the historical context of it is.
I just got it last year, but I'm assuming it's pretty steady.
Sure. Yeah. So, again, advertising in auto brings a lot of special challenges with it because it has a very uniquely long purchase cycle. I think the assumed purchase cycles for most auto advertisers, I want to say around 6 years, maybe probably even longer. You have the used car alternative as well. But for digital, which tends to be a fairly interactive medium, tends to be where you're trying to drive people to conversions, we generally think this 3% number is being staggeringly low. In CPG, similar concept, rather than in market, given that CPGs don't have a 6-year purchase cycle typically, what percentage would you guess of the audience in or exposed households in a typical campaign are actually spending in the category. Well, it's a good deal higher than this.
40.
And I guess it's in the past year. Yeah, so in the past 52 weeks.
It's way down, surely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little less than half.
29%. So, I mean, so you know, for again, you're going consumer goods have the benefit. They're going after a much larger audience, at least who are likely going to purchase in the relatively near term for them for auto. Only 30% of the households that are reached are actually going to or have purchased in the category in the past year. So think about like carbonated beverage, for example, or alcoholic beverage. I think if we looked at the percentage of households in the US, probably a fairly decent that have had either a carbonated beverage or an alcoholic beverage, and still only hitting less than a third. Yeah.
And is this based on the effect of the ad, or generally they see the ad and then they purchase?
So this has nothing to do with this is simply that audience effect. So it has nothing to do with the ad. It's just, it's who the ad is being shown to. Their sound effects are going to
It's not causal.
like these particular numbers are not.
Right.
Like they're not, it's not talking about efficacy at all. It's just, are you getting your ads in front of people either, in this case, who are going to make a purchase in the near term, or have made a purchase in your category within the past year?
Presumably, Trent, the 29% is driven by not necessarily outlying categories, but categories, relatively esoteric categories, right? So if you think about the cereal category, for example, presumably that figure for cereal is about 95 or 100% or something, right?
Sure.
Right.
And similarly for soda, for staples, for bread, or whatever it might be. There presumably are CPG categories where the purchase rate is so low, yet it can still be nominally CPG.
That's correct.
Right?
Well, and important clarification too here is that we actually use IRI's categorization hierarchy. And so what they call a category is usually a level or two down in the hierarchy from what advertisers and other verticals tend to think of. So what they call departments tend to be more what other verticals think of as categories. So there are 4 departments, or I think they have 5. We have covered 4 of health and beauty care, home care, beverage, and food. Okay, everyone's going to buy in all those, presumably. Within that are the categories, and those tend to get a lot more granular. But you're right, they are driven a lot by things like beauty care, for example, which are going to apply to a much smaller percentage.
Right.
Or sweet and salty snacks, larger percentage in baby care, but not going to have the type of coverage that you'd expect for food or cereals. So, you know, when picking audiences, I think we tend to see 2 extremes. One is the over-eager media planner. Totally understand it, which is they pick, you know, with digital, they kind of go crazy, and they check the box on these really, really complex psychographics and all, and with these very elaborate rationales, and they certainly make for a great story. They tend to have very small reach. The other end of the spectrum that we see is advertisers tend to go very broad. And so this is more of a traditional approach where in kind of those traditional channels, thinking TV specifically, where you didn't have the ability to target as narrowly as you do with digital, haven't totally adjusted their mindset yet around to that. And so tend to be focused much more on maybe geographic targeting or demographic-based targeting. And so this is utilizing data in the Blue-Kai marketplace, which again has tens of thousands of audiences from various different vendors and all. It's not just Oracle or Datalogic's branded audiences. In fact, they're just a tiny percentage of the total in there. And so looking across all of them, we're actually able to look for auto in particular, how many buyers fell in each one of them. So not only can we evaluate the performance of a particular audience in terms of its ability to reach buyers, not incremental impact, across the entire marketplace. And so, you know, based on that data, you see a lot of things that are relevant here. Sorry, the ranking is the audience that had, in descending order for the number of actual buyers they had of half-ton pickups. And so 0 is in-market trucks, because that's kind of a give me, like your in-market segment should have the most like buyers, hopefully, unless your modeling is really bad. But the ones after that are motorcycle owner, in market for Texas acreage. I don't know who sells that audience, but apparently does quite well in finding half-ton pickups. Things that are relatively intuitive. And so, thinking beyond just your typical demo, geo, broad-based targeting is that, think for trying to reach buyers in your brand or buyers in your competitor brand, buyers in the category. Think about what some of the logical overlaps are, and then also I think a lot of companies who sell audiences can provide this type of insight of a ranking or insight into how buyers are found across these. And so again, ranking all probably 30,000 audiences in total across the blue kite marketplace. Anyone want to guess what the highest ranked demo was for half-ton pickups? I certainly don't have I don't have a half-ton pickup. I'd look kind of out of place in Boulder, Colorado with one. But anyone have a guess of what the highest ranked demo audience is here for half-ton pickups, for finding the most half-ton pickup buyers?
L35, 44.
What the rank is though. So yes, for demos, but what
as it sits in there.
Right. So if the best is in-market truck buyers, the second is motorcycle owners. What's the rank of the highest demo one?
10. Whoa.
Really interesting.
So, again, it's not that demos are bad. In fact, they're quite good for reach, and they tend to be relatively inexpensive. But augmenting intuition with data can really improve your ability to find audiences that are finding people within that, whatever it is that you're trying to find. Kind of along a similar vein, so we're talking about audience performance, and this is an area that we see a lot of confusion with media partners, advertisers, and agencies alike, is that the tough thing about audience performance is that it's really actually two distinct things. Like a good audience is really, or can be two distinct things, but that are often confounded together. So most audiences are modeled. Does anyone know what a modeled audience is versus a non-modeled one? You're raising your hand or scratching it.
I know what a model audience kind of is, but
what?
Like you take people that fit a certain demographic or target or whatever, and then you do lookalikes where you find things that people that look similar to that or have enough similar behaviors that you can assume they're a similar group of people.
That's absolutely right. And so I think the vast majority of, or certainly large advertisers, or really any sort of time that you're targeting beyond really, really broad demographic or target bases, is that modeling is commonly used. A common use case is using first-party data, so think like your CRM or customer relationship data of finding people who are existing buyers of your brand and finding others who look like it, either because for brands who have a low penetration rate being the percent of households who purchase, if you have a relatively low penetration rate, there are only so many buyers today that you can actually serve an ad to. And so oftentimes those types of brands will model out to find people who they don't have data on, but at least look like people who are currently buying, with the thought that they would be one that would then likely buy in that brand. Or it can be taking a particular behavior, whether again it be purchase or some sort of online conversion. I mean, really you can see based off of anything, and then extending the reach out to reach a broader audience from that, but at least with the goal of finding people who look like that. And so with that in mind, again, this really applies to model audiences more than non-model. There are really kind of two different ways to think about performance for those. One is the model, or is the performance of the model itself, which is for whatever you seeded it with, how well did you actually find those people? So if you seeded it with people who signed up for a particular mailing list, and you want to find people who are similar to that. So this is really common in offline direct mail, like catalog types. Kind of the way that you think about, or one of the ways to think about that audience is how many people did you find who at least look alike that seed, or this is true for brand buyers, you can do it for clickers, whoever it is. And then the second one is the incremental, and this kind of gets to your question from a couple slides ago, which is for whatever people you did find in that audience, how do those people actually respond to the media? And so this, again, is really important because audiences and the data underneath them are becoming a bigger and bigger part of digital spend and becoming more expensive as a part of that. And so understanding a good audience or a good model is an important thing to understand, but then also being able to separate that out from the impact of that audience. And so, a good example is, let's say you have so we'll pick dog food, for example, and you want to build an audience based off of dog food buyers. So the reason I pick dog food is because pet food buyers are notorious for being hard to move, at least in the short term with advertising, because if you have a pet, you'll buy dog food, but you're probably already buying dog food, so the incremental impact, like the opportunity to have an incremental impact is relatively small, whereas most ads are not going to convince someone to go out and buy a dog, buy a cat, unless it's that one TV ad with the rescue dogs. Thank you. Yeah, that one might get people to actually go out and buy dogs. But short of doing that, you have a pet, you're probably going to buy the same amount of dog food regardless of whether you see an ad or not. You might switch to that, and that's where that incremental growth comes from. But it tends to be a much smaller growth opportunity than others within consumer goods. And so, you can have the best model in the world that finds people who look exactly like those dog buyers. I mean, has used the most sophisticated machine learning, performs great, but that might have been the wrong audience to target in the first place. And so it's important to kind of separate these two things out. One is, can the model actually find the people you're trying to find? And that's dependent on the model. It's also dependent on the seed of how kind of narrowly defined it is. And the second one, which is a separate question of whether whatever people your model did find, did they respond to the ad? And interestingly enough, so 2 tends to be the one that advertisers get more intuitively, mostly because when we're talking to them, it tends to be in the context of a measurement or incremental, our ROI product, which is looking at the media impact specifically. But the vast majority of audience purchases that happen outside the context of a causal measurement scenario. So it's important to understand the first one as well. And so a tool that we use in analytics and has been popular in different parts of marketing for a long time is something that's called a gains model or a gains chart. Has anyone seen something like this before? Good. So, popular in direct mail marketing, really anything where you're doing predictive modeling, this tends to kind of be a go-to tool of the trade for evaluating that predictive model and how good it is. And so what you have here is your X or horizontal axis is showing, for a given audience, it's saying how deep are you going in that audience. So out here, I mean, your audience size is 0, 20 million individuals, cookies, households, 40 million, 60 million. And then what you have here on your y-axis is an index from 0x here to 10x. And what the index is an index of this red line. And this red line is basically if your model just sucked, if it did no better than random, how many people in your audience would you expect to find, how many buyers would you expect to find, or whatever it is that you're seeding your audience with. And so, because at a bare minimum, a model should be able to do no worse than you would picking numbers out of a hat. There are cases where they do in fact do worse, and that's a different problem in and of themselves. But usually they can at least perform at random. Random being kind of what you get with this red line. And then the value of the predictive model is really anything that's above this red line, which is saying that up until 20 million households for this particular fictitious audience, it is having value above and beyond random. Again, it's the way that this type of chart is created is that it ranks the households from the highest scored household to the lowest scored. And in other words, like the most likely to be a brand buyer versus the least likely to be a brand buyer in a buyer audience. The best ones will have the highest index, and then all the way down to the red line and where the two intersect is where the model is actually giving you value. And so the nice thing about this is that whether you're a small brand or a large brand, you can use this tool equally well because it's just a different baseline penetration rate. But since you're normalizing and looking at an index rather than the actual percentage, that you can still compare across different brands or different models. And so it's something that direct mail tends to be much more familiar with, largely because they don't think in terms of CPMs, but if they did, they would be closer to $100, probably even more expensive than $100 CPMs, more expensive than the most expensive digital ads, put it that way. So they have a much less margin for error than you do in your typical digital campaign. So they've become really accustomed with selecting audiences that, and for them, it's really figuring out how many people to actually send out catalogs to, because and it's very much a business consideration where within an audience you draw the line of how much performance you want to get for that particular reach. Questions? Okay, on to the last section that we're going to talk about today, which is campaign execution, and really specifically what we're going to talk about is frequency, just because it's an area, one, that we have a lot of rich data on, and two is what is, when you tell people that you have norms and ask them what question they have, first one tends to be of how does Facebook compare to Twitter, which we can't answer. I mean, we can, but contractually we can't answer. The second one is typically around, well, like how many times do I need to show someone an ad for it to be effective? And so the model that we've built around this and that we include with every one of our studies in norms is what's called a dose response, which is actually taken from the pharmaceutical industry, which shows that for a given treatment effect, here the treatment being the actual ad itself, how does a population respond to that? And so you can see here, this green line is the incremental impact of the ad. So the incremental sales is driven by the advertisement for different impression frequencies. So 0 through 50. The 51 out there is really 50 plus, but again, tends, hopefully, unless you have major overserving, tends to be a relatively small percentage of your households. And so if you have the incremental impact for each impression frequency, and then you're also able to at least have an estimate of the cost. I think an important caveat here is that this red line, at least in digital, is almost certainly not straight unless it's a large direct buy, because of the way that auctions work and all that. It probably is, for the higher impression frequencies, overestimating what the cost of serving it is. But absent any data on to the contrary, it's at least a decent estimate of the way the cost works. And once you have those two components, you can take the difference of the two, and that's just the profit for any given impression frequency. And so we've color-coded these. So the green one, what we term zone A, is your increasing profit zone. And so the dashed green line there is actually what we term the optimal frequency, which is the maximum difference between those two lines. It's where your incremental impact of serving the ad is the greatest from the incremental cost of serving that ad. And so here for this, this is an actual study, again, a consumer goods one. It's 12-ish, I want to say, maybe 13. Impressions per household would be the profit maximizing one here. The yellow is an area where, depending on your objective, it can still make sense to serve out there because you're still profitable. It's just that each additional impression you serve makes those particular health or is less and less profitable. Again, you're still driving positive revenue. It's just your cost is climbing on you more quickly than the incremental benefit. And zone C is where no one wants to be, which is where the cost is eating into any sort of revenue you drove previous into the curve, and you're losing money with every impression that you're serving.
Is there a time frame you're trying?
Oh, you mean so this is for a single campaign, so it's just a single campaign link.
Got it. The reason I ask, and many people are really interested to see is the fact we contributed to it. We released our How Advertising Works study earlier on this year, and one aspect of that was around effective frequency in digital. Is it an asymptotic curve, and does it begin to drop off? We actually are rebrand potentially.
Right.
In fact, the finding we had is almost exactly the same. Within a given month, if you were serving, the breakpoint was 35. If you're serving more than 35 impressions in a given month, so basically one a day, you can actually cause your campaign is worse than doing nothing, effectively. So it's a very, very similar finding.
I see. And so it's not just that you're losing money on each additional impression. That's where you're actually like harming sales.
Correct.
So this is kind of the scenario where you're annoying your.
That's exactly right.
Got it. Wow.
Same breakpoint though.
Interesting. That's super interesting. And good to know. I always like confirmation on our numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah, if it conflicted, let me know just afterwards, not for everyone else, but definitely good to know. And so for each one of these, not only do we have this information, but then we also have the more straightforward breakdown, which is the number of households who were in each impression bucket. And so this is pretty typical for a digital campaign. In fact, this is probably a platform, not naming any names specifically, a large digital platform that has pretty good reach, because of the fact that typically we actually see an even steeper drop off between one impression per household over the length of a campaign. And our campaigns tend to be usually, I want to say, around 1 to 3 months in length. So one impression over that entire campaign is certainly not optimal in most situations. It's certainly efficient, but not. You're usually leaving spend on the table, which is the case here, where all the households from here up into this green dashed line are actually you're leaving money on the table. In other words, you could have served more ads and you would have walked away more profitable. And this campaign did actually a nice job of the number of households in B is quite a bit less than A, and then for zone C it's very few. You can see the breakdown. So 3/4 being in zone A, which is good, but could have done better. So I mean, the key thing here is with the different zones is that you want to be on the dashed green line, which is kind of a theoretical place because you can't hit everyone. Usually that's a fraction and all these things. But the closer to the green line, the better off you are. And so taking the two previous slides, we're actually able to combine that information. And so what this is overlaying the colors from here onto this chart for the same study. And then we're able to get basically the profit by frequency bucket. And so in this case, you can see that we add up the zone A revenue, which is, again, where you're leaving money on the table, zone B, which is where you're profitable but starting to diminish, and then zone C. And then we're able to add up basically the total net revenue for a particular study. Taking that number is good. It's interesting to see, what the actual profit delivered by the campaign was. But really, in the context of frequency, it's really about, well, what could you have done? If you had done better, whatever better it is, whether it's serving more or serving fewer based off of what this chart looks like for a respective campaign, is that, what money did you leave on the table by suboptimal execution? And so what we've come up with then is this max net revenue, which is a theoretical number of if you served every household in your study the exact optimum, what would your profit have been? In this case, for this particular campaign, it would have been 500,000. And so taking those two numbers and dividing them, we end up with an efficiency score of 66, which is, to kind of put it in an intuitive way, it's saying that 66% of the potential profit that you could have generated from this campaign is what you actually captured. Again, with the anything less than 100 being what was left on the table due to suboptimal execution. So this campaign, also a real one. This is for a large health and beauty care brand. Leave it there. This one for a large beverage brand for a particular campaign is a great example of, I think, what the key opportunity for improvement here, which is not getting closer to optimum. I mean, yes, closer to optimum is better, but really a lot of brands would just benefit from implementing a frequency cap, or media partners from more effectively implementing their frequency cap. This being a good example. So this is a programmatic campaign that ran on a popular DSP, and you can see that while the campaign showed at the total level a flat lip, so it showed no incremental impact. But if you actually dive deeper within the study itself, you can see that there was a segment of the population that had positive results. In other words, where the ad had a positive impact. The problem with this one was that so many people were in this 50+ bucket out here, and the 50+ bucket was the performance of it was quite a bit below the cost of serving those households, is that it wiped away any sort of benefit that you saw earlier on in the campaign. So really, even in campaigns that we see that don't pay for themselves, or even worse, the ones that don't show any positive impact within the campaign window, there's usually some pocket, whether it be some audience or some creative strategy or some execution bucket that did perform well. It's really a question of whether there was a equal or greater size part of the campaign that was bad enough to wipe it out. And so in that sense, even the worst campaigns, it's not about figuring out how to execute flawlessly. It's really about how to eliminate this type of thing, which is more common than I think any advertiser would like to think. And so across, so the previous slides were individual study looks, and then when we look across the campaigns and norms, here's the breakdown that we see for the median percentage of households that fall into each bucket across campaigns. And so you can see close to 19%, so 1 in 5 impressions that are served are out in zone C, which is like not only were those not profitable, but they're eating away for the parts of your campaign that didn't do well. And then looking, again, a normative view, and this is the last slide, across those studies, if you look at that efficiency score, you can see that the distribution is roughly-ish normal. With the typical campaign for consumer goods reaching less than the 50, an index of 50, I think the average here is, I think want to say, well, a little above 40. You know, there are more bucket or more campaigns than any advertiser would want here in the low efficiency or 0 bucket. Again, where the ones where over-serving is wiping out any sort of positive the campaign did see. But you can see that even the best campaigns, the one that we looked at previously that had an index of 66, is definitely one of our better performers here, as you can see. I think that one would be out. Still have a good amount of upside for improved frequency. And really, once advertisers are out there or media partners are out, you know, beyond 50, then it becomes much more about finding the exact optimum. Before that, though, really all you want to do is just cut down on waste. And I mean, that in and of itself can have a immediate impact on the return ad spend. That's all I got. Questions? Cool.
That's great.
Thanks, guys.
Evelyn, you have anything online? All right, Brenda, fantastic. All right, thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone online. We'll see you all next week. Have a fun rest of the week. Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Really good.